After his wife Helen's funeral, widower Richard Hale struggles with grief in his quiet kitchen. His adult son Mark calls, pressuring him to sell the family home. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The flowers hadn't even wilted when the phone started ringing. That was the first thought that crossed my mind as I stood in the kitchen on a gray Thursday morning. Just 2 weeks had passed since Helen's funeral, but time felt strange, like a hallway where the lights flicker and you're never sure how far you've walked. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and stale coffee, a scent that clung no matter how many windows I cracked open. I cradled my old mug, the dark green ceramic chipped on one side from when Emily, my granddaughter, accidentally knocked it off the counter years ago. She had been so small then, her eyes wide with fear, that I'd be angry, but I'd laughed and told her a chip gives a cup some character. I thought of that moment now, staring at the crack while the phone buzzed like a mosquito I couldn't swat. I answered, though part of me wished I hadn't. "Dad, we need to talk about the house." It was my son, Mark. His voice carried the same impatience I'd known since he was a teenager, sharp-clipped, always in a hurry to get to the point. Only now he was 38, with a mortgage, a wife, a daughter of his own. But the tone hadn't softened. If anything, it had hardened like stone weathered by years of rain. I swallowed before answering. "Good morning to you too, Mark." "Don't start with me," he shot back. "Laura and I have been talking. That place is too big for you alone. The taxes, the upkeep, it's not realistic. We've already found a buyer." I let his words hang in the air, feeling the weight of them settle into my chest. For a moment, I didn't respond. My eyes wandered to the garden outside the kitchen window. The rosemary bush Helen and I had planted leaned over the stone path, its branches heavy. The lemon tree needed pruning. Every stone in that garden felt like a monument to the years we had built together. "There's no mortgage," I said, at last, my voice flat factual. Silence. Then a short laugh from Mark, sharp and dismissive, like the sound of a knife tapping against glass. "Dad, please." Mom's pension barely covered her medication. "We all know you're under strain. You can't keep that place. It's not practical." I gripped the mug tighter, though I hadn't taken a sip. Practical. That was his word. To him, practicality meant reducing life to spreadsheets and bullet points. I pictured him at his dining table laptop, open a column labeled "Dad's House Sale Price Proceeds Split." I'd taught him numbers when he was a boy, making him calculate change for the ice cream truck. Now he was calculating me. "You've been planning this for a while," I said evenly. "That's called being responsible." His reply was quick, rehearsed. "We can't sit around until something happens to you." Something happens to you. The phrase tasted bitter. I set the mug down and let my hand rest against the counter. "Thanks for your concern, son," I said quietly. Then I ended the call before he could sell me my own life in bullet points. The silence that followed was different from the silence I'd been living with since Helen died. This wasn't the stillness of mourning. It was the pause between one blow and the next. I rinsed the untouched coffee down the drain, the bitter smell rising with the steam. My hands smelled faintly of rosemary from the garden, the same herb Helen always cut for Sunday roasts. She used to hand me sprigs like trophies, her smile saying, "Fresh from the source." I stood there for a long while, staring at the empty mug. The kitchen felt foreign, like it belonged to a stranger. Even my own reflection in the hallway mirror didn't look like me anymore. I had lost my wife, but I was starting to realize I was losing pieces of myself too. Then the phone rang again. I considered ignoring it. If grief teaches you anything, it's that avoidance doesn't stop what's coming. The screen showed Laura's name, my daughter. I pressed accept. "Dad, She began, her voice pitched a little too high, the way she always sounded when she was trying to make bad news sound like a gift. Mark and I are on the same page. You both think I should sell the house I finished for her. She hesitated. It's for the best. You could move in here with us. We've got the finished basement, a full bath. Mark says we could add a kitchenette. You'd have your own entrance, your own space. It's perfect. Perfect. The word rang hollow. A basement with a kitchenette wasn't perfect. It was a cage with paint on the walls. And the money, I asked. Well, she said, fumbling, after we cover the contractor for the basement, you could set some aside. Help with Emily's tuition. Maybe help Mark with his new place. It's all family, Dad. Win-win. Win-win. I heard Mark's cadence in her words, the way they echoed each other like they'd rehearsed their lines at dinner. When was the last time you called me to talk about something other than money? I asked. That's not fair, she protested. I've been busy. Emily's in her junior year. Work's been 2 months, I interrupted. It's been 2 months since you called for anything else. The line went brittle and silent. Finally, she blurted, You've been sending Emily money every month. Yes, I said. 500 for 2 years. Her tone turned sharp like an accusation. That's between me and her. Dad. She doesn't need to know that Laura insisted. Of course not. Because if Emily knew, she might start questioning the version of me. Her parents painted the fragile old man who couldn't manage his affairs, the one who needed decisions made for him. I need to go, I said. And this time, I hung up before the conversation could rot into something uglier. The house was quiet again, but my heart was loud. I drifted down the hallway, pausing at Helen's reading glasses still resting on a paperback she'd never finish. My fingers hovered over them, but I pulled back. Touching them felt like a step I wasn't ready to take. Instead, my feet carried me into her study. The room smelled of lemon oil and faint perfume, something floral and subtle that still clung to the curtains. Her desk sat exactly as she'd left it, pen resting diagonally across a yellow legal pad. A corner of an envelope peeked from under a stack of papers. I lowered myself into her chair. The leather was worn smooth where her elbows had rested, and for the first time in 2 weeks my shoulders eased. There was a bottom drawer on the left, stiff from years of sticking. I pulled it open. Inside were the usual clutter: old tax returns, appliance manuals, greeting cards. Beneath them, my fingers found the edge of a pale blue folder. It was heavier than it looked. The papers shifted with a faint whisper, like they knew they'd been waiting for me. On the cover, in Helen's handwriting, those square, deliberate letters that always made even grocery lists feel important, was a note. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. I sat there, the late morning light warming my face, staring at that folder. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than loss. Not hope, not yet. But direction. And in that moment, I understood my children weren't the only ones with a plan. I didn't open the blue folder right away. My hand rested on it like it might burn me if I turned the cover. Instead, I leaned back in Helen's chair, let my eyes trace the neat rows of her handwriting on that sticky note again, and just breathed. The air in her study always smelled faintly of lemon oil, a scent she swore by. Even now, 2 weeks after she was gone, I half expected her to sweep through the door and tease me for sitting in her spot. But she didn't. The only sound was the clock ticking steady, unhurried, almost daring me to take my time. The phone broke that silence again. This time I almost didn't answer. But grief has a way of making you tired of avoidance, so I picked it up. It was Laura again. Dad, she said, her voice trying to sound upbeat, but wobbling like a table with one short leg. Have you thought more about what we talked about? I closed my eyes. You mean selling the house? It's the best option, she pressed. Mark and I already looked at numbers. You'd be better off. And the place, it's just too much for you to handle. You shouldn't be climbing ladders to clean gutters at your age." I almost laughed. At my age. As if I were already halfway buried alongside Helen. "Laura," I said carefully, "I've been keeping this house up for 25 years. I fixed that roof after the storm when you were 10. You remember?" She hesitated. "Of course I remember, but things are different now. We just don't want you to be alone here. You could move in with us. The basement's finished, full bath, your own space. We'd add a kitchenette. It would be perfect." That word again, perfect. People love to throw it around like it's seasoning, but to me it tasted bitter. A basement with a bathroom and a hot plate wasn't perfect. It was a cage painted over with bright words. And the money I asked again, even though I already knew where this was headed. She sighed, her tone slipping into rehearsed sales pitch. "Well, after we cover the contractor for the kitchenette, you'd have some left over. You could help with Emily's tuition, maybe give Mark a hand with his new place. It's all family, Dad. It's win-win." I felt my jaw tighten. I could almost hear Mark's cadence in her words. This wasn't spontaneous. They'd sat together at their dining table, rehearsed their lines, and now they were calling me one after the other to close the deal. "Tell me something," I said, keeping my voice calm. "When was the last time you called me to talk about anything other than money?" "That's not fair," she snapped. 2 months, I said flatly. "It's been 2 months since you called just to talk. Not about bills, not about tuition, not about logistics. Just talk." The silence that followed was sharp and brittle. Finally, she blurted out, "You've been sending Emily money every month, yes." 500 for 2 years, her voice carried something between disbelief and accusation. "Yes," I repeated. "She doesn't need to know that," Laura said quickly. Of course she didn't. Because if Emily knew, she might start questioning the picture her parents had painted of me, the fragile old man who couldn't manage his affairs, who needed saving. "I need to go," I said. And before she could recover, I ended the call. The house was still again, but the silence was no longer empty. It was charged, alive, waiting. I stared at the folder on Helen's desk, my pulse steady but my mind racing. Whatever was inside, she'd meant me to see it after she was gone. But I wasn't ready yet. I pushed back from the desk and walked through the house. Every step echoed in a way it hadn't when Helen was alive. I paused at the window in the living room, looking out at the garden. The rosemary leaned toward the stones, the lemon tree stretched against the pale winter light. Helen used to laugh and say, "Plants don't ask questions, they just keep going." She was right. I tried to imagine myself living in Laura's basement. A single light bulb overhead, a kitchenette, humming walls painted beige to look less like concrete. I could hear Helen's voice in my head, dry and unimpressed. "That's not living, Richard. That's waiting." I went back into the kitchen, set the kettle on, and tried to steady myself. But before the water even boiled, the phone buzzed again. Mark this time. Persistent. "Dad, look, Laura told me you're being difficult. We're just trying to help. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to let the silence stretch to see what he would do with it. He filled it quickly, just like I knew he would. "There's a buyer already lined up. Solid offer. More than the place is worth, honestly. This is your chance to downsize, free yourself from the burden. Be practical. Practical. Always that word. "Do you remember the summer the roof leaked over the east bedroom?" I asked suddenly. "What, you were 12? I spent 2 weeks up there patching shingles. You climbed up with me, remember? Learned how to line them straight, how to hammer without splitting the wood." Mark sighed. "Dad, what does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," I said. "This house isn't just walls. It's work. Work I'm still capable of doing." There was a pause on his end, the kind of pause that meant he was recalculating, adjusting his approach. "Dad, you're almost 70. You shouldn't have to do that kind of work anymore." "And yet I can. I said simply. The kettle whistled behind me. I let it scream a few seconds before shutting it off. I poured the water into a mug and stirred in a spoonful of tea, the ring of the spoon against ceramic loud in the quiet kitchen. Mark's voice dropped lower, colder. We're trying to help you. Don't make us force the issue. Force the issue. The phrase lingered in the air long after I ended the call. I stared down at the tea swirling in my mug. My children thought I was weak, malleable, easy to bend. But they were wrong. I looked toward Helen's study where the blue folder waited. She had left me something, proof maybe, or a plan. And now for the first time since the funeral, I felt the faint stirrings of resolve. I carried the mug into her study and set it beside the folder. My hand hovered over the cover. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy surface, a tired old man in a quiet room. But Helen had written it plain. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. I drew in a deep breath, steadying myself. It was time to open it. The folder sat on Helen's desk like a sealed door, daring me to turn the handle. My fingers traced the edge of the pale blue cover, feeling the slight ridge where the cardboard had bent from years of being pressed into the drawer. Her note stared back at me. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. I'd read it 10 times already, but the words kept pulling me in like a tide. I eased it open. The faint rustle of paper filled the room, a sound so ordinary, yet in that moment it carried weight. Inside, the first thing I saw was a stack of financial statements. At first glance, they looked like any other bank records, but as I flipped through, something gnawed at me. These weren't from our usual accounts. They were from places I'd never heard of, an online bank I didn't recognize, a small credit union in another county, and every one of them was in Helen's name alone. The balances weren't huge, 8,000 here, 12,000 there, but they weren't pennies either. Enough to matter. Enough to make me wonder why she'd kept them separate. I leaned back in her chair, the papers trembling slightly in my hands. Helen and I had always shared everything, or at least I'd thought we had. Vacations, bills, even silly things like grocery lists. Why had she kept this hidden? I set the bank records aside and pulled out the next layer. My breath caught. It was a property deed. The heavy paper was stamped with a notary seal, the ink faded but legible. My eyes ran across the lines until they froze on the words, Algarve, Portugal. Owner Helen Margaret Hale. Portugal. I blinked, thinking I'd misread it. But there it was, black and white. A villa purchased 10 years ago. No mention of me anywhere on the document. Just her name. Beneath the deed was a letter from a law firm in Lisbon dated just last spring. It confirmed the property's current value and offered to manage it as a rental. Helen had scribbled a note in the margin, her familiar looping cursive. Not yet. Keep private. Keep private. The words rolled around in my head like stones in a glass jar. What else had she been keeping from me? I dug deeper into the folder. There were insurance policies, some old, some recent. Most named the kids as beneficiaries, but one caught my eye. A newer policy, smaller, modest compared to the rest, but the sole beneficiary was Emily. Not Mark, not Laura, just Emily. I sat back, my heart pounding in my ears. Helen had always been deliberate. She never forgot details, never overlooked fine print. If she had set things up this way, it wasn't by accident. I pulled out another envelope tucked in the back. My hands shook as I slid the letter free. It was dated 2 years ago, written in Helen's careful cursive. Richard, it began, if you found this, then I'm gone. And if I'm right, the calls have already started. My throat tightened. She knew. She had seen it coming before I ever did. They will circle you not because they need you, but because they want what you've built. I've watched it for years, the questions about money, the way they count what isn't theirs yet. You've always given them the benefit of the doubt. I stopped doing that long ago. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep reading. The house is yours. It stays yours. I paid it off so you'd never have to answer to them about it. But I also knew they'd try to make you believe you couldn't manage alone. That's why there's a second plan. The villa in Portugal is for you, though it isn't in your name. You'll find instructions in the back. Follow them if you need to disappear for a while. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game. Her voice rang in my head as clearly as if she were standing beside me. Calm. Certain. Not angry. Never angry, but sure. My hands trembled as I turned to the back of the folder. A typed page listed contacts the Lisbon law firm, a caretaker named Anna, and a phone number with an international code. Taped to the sheet was a small brass key. Next to it, in Helen's neat hand, a note, "Trust Anna." She owes me her life. Long story. I stared at the key. Its teeth glinted in the soft light streaming through the curtains. I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. Slowly, I set the papers down on the desk. My pulse was steady, but my thoughts were racing. I looked around the study at the familiar clutter that suddenly felt like evidence. Helen's reading glasses, the legal pad, the framed photograph of her and Emily in the garden. All of it carried new meaning. I picked up the photograph. On the back, in Helen's handwriting, were the words, "Teach her how to keep what matters." For a long time, I just sat there staring at that line. It wasn't just advice, it was a charge, a responsibility. She hadn't trusted Mark and Laura with that lesson she'd trusted me. Outside, the garden swayed in a light breeze. The rosemary shifted, the lemon tree caught slants of late sun. It felt like Helen was still here somehow, pointing me toward something beyond grief. I turned back to the letter. She had left me not just memories, but a road map. A reminder that I wasn't powerless, that I didn't have to play along with my children's plans. I set the folder carefully back on the desk, but I didn't close it this time. I let it lie open, the pages spread out like a story half read. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something cut through the fog of loss. Not anger, not even hope, yet something sharper. Direction. Helen had left me a secret life, and now it was mine to decide what to do with it. I don't know how long I sat there with Helen's letter trembling in my hands. Minutes, maybe an hour. The sunlight inched its way across the desk, and the shadows from the garden stretched long and thin through the curtains. Every word she had written seemed carved into me. She had anticipated everything: my grief, the pressure from the kids, even the specific tricks they'd use. It was like she'd walked ahead into this storm and built me a shelter before I even knew rain was coming. I read the letter again, slower this time, tracing each line with my finger. They will circle you not because they need you, but because they want what you've built. The house is yours, it stays yours. I paid it off so you'd never have to answer to them about it. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game. Her words had a rhythm to them, steady and unflinching. I could almost hear her voice, calm but firm, the way she used to talk to me whenever I doubted myself. She had known me better than I knew myself, and now she was guiding me from beyond the grave. I placed the letter carefully beside the photograph of her and Emily in the garden. Helen's smile in that picture wasn't the polite one she wore for guests. It was the wide, unguarded smile she saved for quiet afternoons with Emily. Her arm wrapped around our granddaughter, both of them in straw hats, their hands dirty from planting herbs. On the back, the words she'd scrawled still stared up at me. Teach her how to keep what matters. That line haunted me. It wasn't just advice for Emily. It was a reminder for me. I reached for the brass key taped to the page of contacts. It was small, worn, its teeth catching the light. I turned it over in my hand, wondering what it opened. A door in Portugal, yes, but maybe something more than that. Maybe freedom. Maybe escape. Next, I picked up the typed instruction sheet. There was a law firm's name numbers for overseas accounts, and most surprising, a line for a woman named Anna. Beside her name, Helen had scribbled, "Trust Anna. She owes me her life." Long story. I stared at that note, my mind spinning. Helen had never mentioned anyone named Anna. Not once in all the decades we shared. What kind of debt had this woman owed my wife, and why had Helen been so confident I could trust her? The questions piled up, but Helen's handwriting was enough. When she told me to trust someone, I trusted them. She had never been wrong about people. The longer I studied the folder, the more I realized it wasn't just paperwork, it was a message. She'd left me a second life, folded neatly between these pages, a contingency plan she hadn't even told me about. I stood and walked to the kitchen window again. The garden looked different now, not just a place of memories, but a kind of compass. The rosemary leaning across the stone path, the lemon tree reaching for the sun, they looked like signals messages Helen had left in living form. I let the thought steady me. For years, I'd dismissed Helen's cautious streak as unnecessary worry. She noticed things I didn't, small comments from Mark, the way Laura's eyes lingered on the house whenever she visited, the offhand jokes about inheritance. I always brushed them off. They're just kids, I'd said. They'll come around. But Helen hadn't brushed them off. She'd seen the patterns forming, and she'd acted. She paid off the mortgage in secret. She bought property in another country. She created accounts, policies, layers of security, all without telling me. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she knew I'd argue with her. I would have told her she was being paranoid. That's who I was. And maybe she knew I'd need proof, hard and undeniable, when the time came. I sat back down at her desk, the weight of her planning pressing on me. She'd done all of this because she loved me, because she knew I'd need strength I didn't think I had. The phone rang again, startling me. I glanced at the screen. Mark. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail alert buzzed. His voice played back, sharp but measured. "Dad, just think about what I said. We can make this easy for you. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Easy for him, maybe. Not for me." I deleted the voicemail. Another buzz. A text from Laura. "We'll come by Saturday to talk. Bring Emily. It'll be good to see you." I stared at the screen. Bring Emily. As if I were a guest, not the host. My eyes drifted back to Helen's letter. She had known this would happen. She had warned me, they will circle you not because they need you, but because they want what you've built. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of steel ran through me. I wasn't powerless. I had Helen's plan. I had her words. I had proof. I gathered the documents back into the folder, but I didn't put it in her drawer again. Instead, I carried it into my study and placed it in the bottom drawer of my own desk. The distinction mattered. Her folder was how we got here. My desk would be how I decided what to do next. Then I locked the drawer. The click of the lock sounded like punctuation. Final. Firm. I leaned back in my chair, the room quiet around me. For the first time since Helen's funeral, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a pause before the first move in a game I was finally ready to play. I looked at the brass key again, gleaming under the lamplight. Somewhere across the ocean in a sunlit villa, Helen had bought in secret a door waited for me. A door to a life she'd built quietly, patiently, while I wasn't looking. And now it was mine to open. That night, I didn't sleep in my own bed. I carried the blue folder upstairs, set it on the quilt Helen had sewn years ago, and sat staring at it like it might dissolve if I blinked too long. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets she used to tuck in the dresser drawers. I ran my fingers over the brass key, the ridges sharp and cool against my skin. I tried to imagine what door it opened. A heavy wooden one, whitewashed, maybe iron hinges with salt on them from the sea air Portugal. The word itself felt foreign in my mouth, exotic and distant. I had never even been there. Helen and I had talked about traveling once long before the cancer. She'd shown me magazine pictures of golden beaches and tiled courtyards of old stone streets winding towards the sea. But we never made it. There was always something else, Bill's children time. And yet quietly she had gone ahead and claimed a piece of it for us. I opened the folder again and read through her instructions carefully. The typed sheet listed the Lisbon law firm names, phone numbers, even a fax line. There was a line for a caretaker, Anna, with a handwritten note, "Trust her. She owes me her life." That line stuck under my skin. Helen had always been careful with words. If she'd written "owes me her life," it wasn't casual. But what had happened? What debt bound this woman to my wife? And why had Helen been so certain that I should rely on her? The questions circled me, but I reminded myself, Helen never left loose ends. If she told me to trust Anna, then trust her I would. The folder also held a typed instruction page tucked in the back. At the top in bold, it read, "In case you must leave." I read slowly, "Contact the Lisbon firm. Confirm standing as surviving spouse. Do not discuss with children. Do not transfer documents until advised. Key opens front door of villa. Anna will meet you if called. Keep private until necessary." Her handwriting filled the margins with reminders. Never rush. Never explain. Decide, don't ask. They will never understand. I traced those words with my thumb. They were like commandments, rules carved out of love and foresight. Helen had not only planned for my survival, she had planned for my dignity. I set the papers aside and stared at the ceiling, the beams shadowed in the lamplight. For years I'd let myself believe Helen was the cautious one, the worrier, the one always seeing storms before they arrived. But here I was sitting with proof that she hadn't been paranoid. She'd been right. And she'd acted. I thought about Mark's voice earlier that day, his sharp laugh when I told him the mortgage was paid. About Laura's rehearsed kindness, the way she pitched her tone high, like she was delivering good news when she was really delivering a verdict. They thought I was weak. They thought grief had hollowed me out. They thought I would fold. But Helen had already built me a bridge. I leaned over and opened her letter again, the one dated 2 years ago. "The villa in Portugal is for you. Follow the instructions if you need to disappear. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game. Disappear." The word chilled me. Did she really expect me to leave? To step away from the house, the garden, the life we had built here? Could she have known I might need not just a backup plan, but an escape hatch? I closed my eyes and pictured the garden, the rosemary bushes, the lemon tree, the stone path Helen had insisted we lay by hand. My whole life was wrapped in those stones. And yet somewhere across an ocean, Helen had planted another life for me. A villa, a caretaker named Anna, a second chance hidden until I needed it. The thought both comforted and frightened me. I rose and walked back into Helen's study, setting the folder on her desk once more. I sat in her chair, listening to the silence of the house. The air felt different now, less suffocating, more charged, like the stillness before a storm breaks. The phone buzzed again on the console table. I ignored it. I didn't even check the screen. For the first time, I felt no urgency to respond. Let them call. Let them circle. I wasn't cornered. Not anymore. I looked at the brass key again, lying against the papers. I picked it up and pressed it into my palm until the ridges left marks in my skin. Helen had thought of everything. She'd left me proof protection and even the possibility of vanishing if I chose. I whispered into the quiet, my voice rough. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what they'd try. You knew I'd doubt myself. And you gave me this so I wouldn't." The clock in the study ticked on. For the first time in weeks, I felt myself breathe deeply. Not shallow, panicked breaths, but steady ones. I slid the brass key into my pocket. I left the folder open on the desk, pages spread like a map, and I stood there letting the truth sink in. Helen had left me 2 lives, one here in the house we built, and one waiting far away behind a door only I had the key to. Morning light slid across the hardwood floors in long, pale strips when I woke. I'd left the blue folder open on Helen's desk overnight, and it was the first thing I saw as I stepped into the study. The brass key caught the sun, throwing a thin glint of light across the wall. For a moment I stood there just watching it shimmer like a quiet reminder that I wasn't finished uncovering everything Helen had left behind. I sat in her chair again, pulled the folder closer, and flipped through the stack of papers more carefully. Bank statements, deeds, notes in her handwriting. Then near the middle, I saw it, an insurance policy. I expected the usual, a large sum split between Mark and Laura. That was how things had always been structured, standard and predictable. But this one was different. The amount was smaller than the others, but it wasn't insignificant. What caught me wasn't the number, though it was the beneficiary line. My eyes scanned it twice to be sure. Emily Hale. Not her parents, not divided among the children. Just Emily. My breath caught. Helen had chosen our granddaughter. Not Mark, not Laura. She had bypassed her own children to name the youngest of the family. I leaned back the policy, trembling in my hand. Helen had done this deliberately. She wasn't careless. She never left loose ends. If Emily was the sole beneficiary, it was intentional. I thought about Emily, the way her hair smelled faintly of strawberries when she hugged me, the way she smiled wide and unguarded, not yet sharpened by the world. She was young, still in school, still learning what it meant to carry responsibility. But Helen had seen something in her. Something she hadn't seen, or no longer saw in our children. Teach her how to keep what matters, Helen had written on the back of that photograph. The words rang louder now. I pictured Mark at 12 up on the roof with me hammering shingles. I remembered Laura at 17 begging to take piano lessons only to abandon them when the praise stopped coming. I loved them both, but Helen had noticed something in the years that followed, something I had missed. They had grown up measuring their lives in what they could take, not what they could hold. And Helen had decided Emily was the one who still had a chance to learn differently. The realization stung. Not because I disagreed, but because she'd been right. I looked at the policy again, the paper heavy in my hands. Helen had signed it after her diagnosis. She had known her time was short, and in that window of clarity she had made a choice. Not for the children who argued over numbers, but for the grandchild who still drew gardens in colored pencil and believed in truth. I thought about the last time Emily had visited. She had run through the garden, stopping to point at the rosemary and lemon tree, sketching them later with a stub of colored pencil. She had handed me the drawing like it was treasure. "It's Grandma's garden," she'd said proudly. I had tucked it into a drawer, not realizing then how much weight it carried. Helen had seen it, though. She had seen that Emily drew what was true. That she didn't look at the house and see a ledger or a sale price. She looked at it and saw roots, memory, continuity. My throat tightened as I set the policy on the desk. Helen hadn't just been protecting me, she had been protecting Emily's future. She had carved out a piece of herself to give to the one person she believed would honor it. The phone buzzed on the console table again. I didn't move. Whoever it was could wait. Instead, I pulled open the desk drawer and found the photograph again, the one of Helen and Emily in straw hats, their hands dirty from planting herbs. I set it beside the policy. The picture and the paper together told a story Helen hadn't lived long enough to say out loud. This skips a generation. Pass it on to her? I whispered into the empty room. I'll teach her, Helen. I promise. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. But in that quiet, I felt something shift. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was carrying out a mission Helen had started. I closed the folder gently and locked it back in my drawer. Not to hide it from myself, but to protect it from them, Mark and Laura. They wouldn't understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself coffee, and this time I drank it. The bitterness steadied me. Mark and Laura thought I was fragile, but they had no idea Helen had armed me with more than paper. She had armed me with purpose, with clarity, with a truth they weren't meant to hold. Emily was the one who mattered now. I stared out the window at the garden again, the rosemary shifting in the breeze, the lemon tree catching light. Helen had always said plants don't lie. They grow toward the sun, no matter what. Emily would learn that lesson too. I carried the coffee back into the study, sat down, and opened a clean yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote 3 columns: what they know, what they don't, what Helen wanted. Under what they know, I wrote Dad is grieving, house is large, Dad is alone. Under what they don't, I wrote house paid off, secret accounts, villa in Portugal, insurance policy for Emily. And under what Helen wanted, I wrote one line: teach Emily how to keep what matters. I set the pen down and studied the page. The first 2 columns were facts. The third was purpose, and for the first time since Helen's funeral, I felt something close to steady ground under my feet. I folded the paper and slid it into the folder. Then I picked up the brass key again and held it tight. Helen had left me more than a plan. She had left me a legacy to protect. And I would. I couldn't shake the weight of Helen's words. They followed me through the house like shadows I couldn't turn away from. Every room whispered something back at me, reminders of what she had tried to tell me while she was alive, things I hadn't wanted to hear. I walked the hallway, my hand brushing the tick marks on the wall where we measured the kids' heights over the years. Mark at 8, Laura at 12. Little scratches of pencil that had felt like victories at the time. I remembered how proud I'd been watching them grow taller, watching them lean into their futures. I thought growth was proof of character. Helen had known better. One evening, maybe a year before her diagnosis, Helen and I had been sitting out on the porch. The sky had that late summer haze, gold drifting into purple. Mark had just left after one of his visits. He'd spent half the time on his phone, the other half hinting about money college funds for Emily upgrades for the house investments he thought were smart. When the car pulled away, I'd sighed and said, "He loves us. He just worries about practical things." Helen had given me a look over her glass of iced tea, the kind of look that could slice right through my optimism. "Richard," she said, "they don't love you the way you think they do. They love the version of you that says yes." I'd bristled at that. "That's not fair," I told her. "They've got their own stresses. Mark's raising a family. Laura's working hard." But Helen had just shaken her head, her gaze steady on me. "It's not about work or stress. It's about how they see you. To them, you're not their father anymore. You're a resource, a vault with a heartbeat." I remember getting angry then. Not at her, but at the idea. "You're reading too much into it," I'd said. "They don't mean harm. They're just asking questions." Questions, she said softly, that all point to the same thing, what they stand to gain when you're gone. At the time, I'd brushed it off. I'd always been the one to smooth over tension, to give the benefit of the doubt. Helen had been the sharp-eyed one, the realist. I thought she was being too hard on them. But sitting in her study now, the blue folder spread open in front of me, I realized she hadn't been wrong. She'd been preparing me for exactly this. I thought about Laura, too. She had once been so earnest. I remembered when she was in 7th grade writing an essay about wanting to be the person who brings things to the table. She read it to us at dinner, her eyes shining, and I'd felt proud. But somewhere along the way, that ambition had shifted. The table she wanted to bring things to wasn't ours anymore. It was hers. And the things she wanted to bring weren't hers to give. They were mine to hand over. Helen had seen it years before I did. She had pulled me aside after one of Laura's visits, her voice low, her expression troubled. "She's charming when she wants something," Helen said. "But notice she only calls when she does." I'd shrugged. That's life. People get busy. Helen hadn't argued. She rarely did when I dismissed her concerns. But her silence back then hadn't been agreement, it had been calculation. She had already started preparing for the day when I would have to face what I didn't want to admit. And here I was staring at the proof. I picked up the insurance policy again, the one naming Emily. I thought about how Helen had skipped over the children entirely, not because she didn't love them, but because she no longer trusted them. She had entrusted me with something greater to teach Emily a different way to make sure she didn't inherit the same hunger her parents carried. The house creaked softly as I sat there, as if it too remembered. I looked around the study, her desk, her books, her careful order. Helen had always been deliberate. Even her grocery lists were written like they mattered. And this folder was her last list, the one she knew I would need most. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. "Dad will be there Saturday morning. Let's be reasonable." Reasonable. His favorite word when he wanted his way. I set the phone down without replying. Instead, I reached for a notebook and began to write not lists this time, but memories. Conversations with Helen. The warnings I had ignored. The patterns I could now see clearly. Each one felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place. I remembered Helen's words on the porch. "They love the version of you that says yes." I whispered them aloud, and the truth of it rang through the quiet room like a bell. Yes had been easy. Yes had kept the peace. But yes had also blinded me. Now Helen had handed me the strength to say no. I pressed the notebook shut and looked once more at the photograph of her and Emily in the garden. Helen's handwriting on the back echoed in my head. Teach her how to keep what matters. I nodded to the empty room, my chest tight but steady. "I hear you, Helen," I said. "And I will." The shadows stretched longer across the floor, the day slipping into evening. For the first time since her funeral, I felt less like a man drowning in loss, and more like a man standing on the shore, staring at a horizon Helen had already mapped out for me. She had seen the storm. She had left me the tools. And now it was my turn to use them. Saturday morning arrived with the smell of rain still hanging in the air. The garden glistened under a thin veil of dew, the rosemary damp and heavy, the lemon tree leaves shining like polished glass. I stood at the window sipping coffee, steadying myself. Today they were coming, Mark, Laura, and Emily. I knew what it meant. They weren't coming to visit. They were coming to press the issue. I set the blue folder back in my drawer, locking it with a click. Not because I feared Emily, but because I knew Mark and Laura would be fishing for openings. Helen's words echoed in my head. Never rush. Never explain. Decide, don't ask. The sound of tires crunching on gravel reached me before the knock on the door. I opened it to see Mark in a pressed button-down, Laura in a fitted jacket, both dressed like they were heading into a negotiation instead of visiting their father. Between them, Emily stood in a pale yellow hoodie, her hair in a loose ponytail, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Grandpa," she said, rushing forward. She wrapped her arms around me before anyone else could speak. For a moment, the world softened. She still hugged me like I mattered, not like I was a problem to be solved. "Good to see you, sweetheart," I murmured, kissing the top of her head. Mark cleared his throat behind us. "Dad, can we come in?" I nodded and led them to the kitchen. The kettle was already hot, and I poured tea into cups the way Helen used to, no sugar for Mark, extra milk for Laura. The muscle memory steadied me. We sat around the table. Emily set her backpack down and began pulling out a sketchbook. She didn't care about the tension threading through the room. She was already lost in her drawings. Rosemary sprigs, lemon blossoms, the outline of the garden path. She had captured it all in pencil and watercolor, tiny details that only someone who loved this place would notice. Mark and Laura exchanged a glance, and then Mark leaned forward. "Dad, we need to talk seriously now. The house, it's too much for you. You can't keep it up alone. We've already looked at offers. One buyer is ready to move quickly. You'd be set for years." I sipped my tea slowly, letting his words hang in the air. "There's no mortgage," I said evenly. Laura blinked. What? Mark frowned. "That can't be right. It's been paid off for years," I said. I didn't raise my voice, but the weight of the truth landed like a hammer. "Your mother took care of it." Silence followed. Mark's jaw tightened. Laura's hands fluttered against her cup before she set it down. Their practiced rhythm had been broken. Emily looked up from her sketchbook. "Really, Grandma paid it off." "That's awesome." Her smile was pure, genuine, uncalculated. I nodded, meeting her eyes. "Yes, she did. She wanted to make sure this home would never be a burden." Mark shifted in his chair. "Dad, even if that's true, the taxes alone, I can handle the taxes," I said firmly. Laura tried to recover, her voice pitched in that too bright tone. "We're just worried about you. This place is so big. What if something happens? Wouldn't you feel safer with us?" I leaned back, my gaze steady. "This house is safe. It's been our home for decades. Your mother wanted it that way. She made sure of it." They both fell quiet, recalibrating. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, the script they'd rehearsed faltering. Helen had been right. She'd warned me. They will circle you not because they need you, but because they want what you've built. Emily broke the silence. She turned her sketchbook around to show me her drawing. "Look, Grandpa. I drew Grandma's garden again. Do you think I got the rosemary right? I studied the picture. Every branch carefully shaded the path, traced stone by stone." My throat tightened. "It's perfect," I said softly. Emily beamed her joy, untouched by the undercurrents in the room. Laura cleared her throat, trying to redirect. "Dad, no one's saying you can't love the house. But you don't have to live here to keep the memories alive. We could find you something smaller, easier." I set my cup down. "Your mother wanted me here," I said. "She wanted this house to stay in my hands. And it will." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. "I've made my decision." The firmness in my tone caught even me off guard. For weeks I'd been drifting unsure, weighed down by grief. But Helen's folder had given me clarity. I wasn't stumbling anymore. Emily slipped her drawing across the table toward me. "You can keep it," she said shyly. I smiled and placed the sketch on the counter where Helen's reading glasses still rested. Side by side, they looked like proof of continuity, a past carefully built, a future still sketching itself into being. The tension broke a little. Laura leaned back, exhaling through her nose. Mark tapped his fingers against his cup, restless. But I felt steady. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I wasn't defending myself, I was declaring. They had come here expecting to find a weak-old man they could nudge into agreement. Instead, they'd found Helen's husband carrying her plan like armor, and the look on their faces told me they hadn't planned for that at all. The moment the front door shut behind them, the house exhaled with me. The silence that followed was thick, not empty, but dense like the air after a thunderstorm. I stood in the hallway listening to the car tires crunch down the gravel drive, the sound fading until it was only memory. Emily's sketch still sat on the counter beside Helen's glasses. I picked it up and studied it again, each rosemary branch shaded with careful strokes, the lemon tree reaching towards the sky in pale green watercolor. She had drawn what mattered, not what could be sold. Helen had been right to choose her. I slipped the drawing into the study and set it gently atop the blue folder. For a moment, I just stared at the folder's spine, the papers inside like a heartbeat waiting to be heard again. Then I unlocked my drawer, pulled it out, and opened it wide. The pages rustled as I spread them across the desk. Bank statements, deeds, instructions, the insurance policy for Emily. And Helen's letter, her handwriting steady, sure, filled with warnings I had once dismissed. I read the line again. Contact the Lisbon firm. Confirm standing as surviving spouse. Do not discuss with children. My fingers hovered over the phone. The Lisbon number was written clearly in ink international code and all. I traced it with my thumb, weighing the decision. Calling would be more than inquiry. It would be commitment. It would mean stepping into the second life Helen had built, one that existed beyond these walls. I thought about what had just happened in the kitchen. Mark's frown, Laura's nervous flutter, the way both of them had fallen silent when I said the mortgage was gone. They had expected weakness. They had expected compliance. Instead, I had thrown a stone into the script they'd rehearsed. Their silence had been victory, but only a temporary one. They'd be back. Helen knew it, and now so did I. The house creaked around me, the old beams settling. I thought about the years of work I'd put into these walls, every nail hammered, every board, replaced every storm weathered. But I also thought about Helen sitting here years ago buying a villa overseas in secret. She hadn't meant to erase this home. She had meant to give me another option. A doorway, should I need it. I lifted the brass key and rolled it in my palm, the ridges pressing into my skin. My imagination carried me across the ocean whitewashed walls, terracotta roof, tiles, shutters thrown open to the sea air. Helen had walked those streets in her mind, maybe even in person. Had she ever traveled without telling me? I doubted it. But she had dreamed it deeply enough to make it real, to purchase it, to put it in writing. The thought both comforted and unsettled me. I opened the smaller envelope tucked in the back. Inside were photographs, printouts, not originals. Grainy, but clear enough. A white villa with arched windows, a tiled courtyard with vines climbing the walls, a view of the Atlantic stretching endless and blue beyond a stone terrace. She had kept these hidden too. Proof of what she'd secured. Proof of the life she wanted me to have if things here became unbearable. I laid the photographs across the desk and stared at them until my eyes blurred. The house in Portugal didn't feel foreign, it felt waiting. The phone on the desk looked heavier now, its buttons daring me. I picked it up, dialed the first few numbers of the Lisbon firm, then stopped. My thumb hovered. I could hear Helen's voice in my head. Never rush, never explain. Decide, don't ask. I set the phone down slowly. Not yet. Timing mattered. Instead, I turned to the page with Anna's name. Her number was written in Helen's familiar hand, softer than the rest, almost protective. Trust Anna. She owes me her life. I wanted to know who this woman was, why she owed Helen something so profound. Why Helen had trusted her enough to make her the gatekeeper of the villa. But not tonight. Tonight I needed stillness, not more questions. I gathered the documents, carefully stacking them in order. I tucked Emily's drawing on top, letting it be the cover of the life Helen had left me. Then I slid everything back into the folder, locked it in my desk, and pocketed the brass key. In the kitchen, I poured myself another cup of tea. The house was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a stage between acts, a pause before movement. I sipped slowly, my gaze drifting to the window. The garden glistened under the silver blue of moonlight, the rosemary bending the lemon tree standing tall. Helen had been right about the children. She had been right about the house. And she had been right that I would need strength when they came circling. But she had also left me a map, and I wasn't done following it. The next morning I woke before dawn. The house was still, the silence broken only by the faint tick of the hallway clock. I brewed coffee, the smell filling the kitchen rich and grounding. The mug warmed my hands, but my mind was restless. I sat at Helen's desk again, the blue folder spread open. My eyes returned to Anna's name and number written in Helen's steady hand. Trust Anna. She owes me her life. That line wouldn't let me go. I had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering who Anna was. A friend Helen had never mentioned, someone she had helped in secret. The phrasing wasn't casual. Helen hadn't written she's reliable or she's kind. She had written she owes me her life. That meant something. I picked up the phone and dialed the number, my fingers heavy. The call clicked, and a woman's voice answered, low, accented with the careful enunciation of someone fluent in English, but not native. Hello? Is this Anna? I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. A pause. Then, yes. Who is this? My name is Richard Hale, I said. My throat tightened. I'm Helen's husband. Silence on the line. A sharp inhale like someone punched the air from her lungs. Then softly, Helen. Yes, I whispered. She passed away. Another silence, heavier this time. When Anna spoke again, her voice carried a tremor. I am sorry. She was my friend, my savior. I gripped the phone tighter. She wrote your name in her notes. She told me to trust you. She said you owe her your life. A small laugh came through, bitter and tender at once. Yes. That is true. Without her, I would not be here. Not in Portugal, not anywhere. She helped me when no one else would. I wanted to ask more, but I held back. Helen's warning echoed, never rush, never explain. Instead, I asked simply, she bought a villa in Algarve. Yes, Anna said immediately. She told me it was for you. She said one day you might call, that I must help you. I closed my eyes, the weight of her foresight pressing down on me. She never told me about it. Not once. That was her way, Anna said. She did not want to burden you. She wanted to give you choice. Freedom. The word rang in me, freedom. Helen had written, sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game. This villa wasn't just a property. It was freedom folded into bricks and keys and sea air. Is the villa still there? I asked. Yes, Anna said. It is waiting. I have kept it ready. The garden, the rooms. I thought maybe she would come herself, but now... Her voice broke. Now it is for you. I swallowed hard. The idea of a villa across the ocean tended quietly. All this time felt surreal. Why did she trust you? I asked gently. Anna exhaled. That is not my story to tell. Not all of it. Only this: you can trust me because Helen trusted me. She saved me once, and I will never forget. Her voice carried conviction, the kind that can't be faked. I let the silence stretch a moment, feeling it settle in my bones. Thank you, I said finally. She told me you might need to leave quickly, Anna said. If that day comes, call me again. I will meet you at the villa. You will not be alone. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. All right. We said goodbye, and the line clicked dead. I set the phone down slowly, my hand lingering on it. The house was quiet again, but something had shifted. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I felt connected to something larger than grief. There was a thread running from her to Anna, to me a lifeline stretched across an ocean. I looked at the brass key on the desk, its teeth catching the morning light. It no longer felt abstract. Somewhere in Portugal, a door was waiting. A villa Helen had bought Anna had kept, and now I had inherited not just as property but as choice. I folded the photographs back into the folder, my movements deliberate. Then I wrote Anna's name and number in my notebook, underlined twice. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. I poured another cup of coffee, stronger this time. I carried it to the window and looked out at the garden. The rosemary was heavy with dew, the lemon tree stretching toward the light. Helen had left me roots here, and branches reaching across the ocean. Mark and Laura thought they could force me into their plan. But Helen had left me one of my own. For the first time in weeks, I felt not just grief, not just burden, but something sharper, something steadier, direction. I didn't wait long after speaking with Anna to take the next step. The folder had given me proof, and Anna had given me confirmation, but I needed something more legal certainty. If I was going to face Mark and Laura again, I couldn't just lean on Helen's foresight. I needed a shield in black and white. That's why I called Peter Alvarez. Peter and I had known each other for 40 years. We'd met back when our kids were in grade school, sharing sideline bleachers at soccer games and backyard barbecues that stretched too late into summer nights. He was the kind of man who carried himself with quiet authority. Even when he wasn't in the courtroom, he had a way of making you sit straighter just by walking into a room. "Richard," he said when he picked up his voice, steady and warm. "I was wondering when you'd call." "How are you holding up day by day?" I said truthfully. "Listen, Peter, I need your eyes on something. It's important." His tone shifted, immediately professional now. "Bring it by." "My office is quiet this morning." I slid the blue folder into a worn leather briefcase Helen had given me years ago, and drove across town. The streets blurred past strip malls, gas stations, the same coffee shop where Helen and I used to stop on Sunday mornings. Everything felt familiar, and yet I was carrying something that made the familiar look different. Peter's office smelled of old wood and books, the walls lined with shelves sagging under the weight of case law. He looked up from behind his desk, his salt and pepper hair thinner than I remembered, his glasses perched low on his nose. "You look tired," he said softly. "I am," I admitted. "But I've got something here that Helen left me, and I need to know what it means." I laid the folder on his desk and opened it. Peter's brow furrowed as he leaned in, adjusting his glasses. He read silently, page after page, the quiet broken only by the shuffle of papers. After what felt like forever, he sat back, hands folded across his stomach. "Helen was thorough," he said finally. "Always was," I murmured. "She paid off your mortgage years ago," he continued, tapping the deed. "This house is yours outright. There's no lien, no debt, nothing your children can leverage. It cannot be sold without your signature, and as long as you're alive, your decision is final." Relief washed through me, sharp and sudden. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it in plain language. "And the villa?" I asked. Peter nodded slowly. "Yes, it's in her name alone, but the documents she left are airtight. With her passing, you can assert your claim as surviving spouse. The Lisbon firm can facilitate the transfer. You'll need to provide identification and her death certificate, but otherwise it's straightforward." Straightforward. The word felt like a gift. And this, I slid the insurance policy across the desk, the one naming Emily. Peter studied it, then looked at me with something like admiration. Helen knew exactly what she was doing. This policy bypasses her estate entirely. It cannot be contested by Mark or Laura. The money goes straight to Emily no matter what. I sat back, the weight in my chest loosening. So she protected me. And she protected Emily. Peter nodded. She built walls around you both. Quietly. Carefully. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Richard, listen to me. Do not underestimate what your children might try. They can't touch the deed. They can't touch the policy. But they can make noise. They can file motions, drag you into court, claim you're not competent. It happens more than you'd think. The warning landed hard, but I didn't flinch. I'm not incompetent. I know that, Peter said firmly. But they'll test it, which is why I'm going to draft a few things for you. Letters, protections, documentation. You'll sign them and we'll put them on file. That way, if they try to move against you, we'll be ready. I nodded, gratitude swelling in me. Thank you, Peter. He smiled faintly. Don't thank me. Thank Helen. She made this easier for us. All I'm doing is tightening the bolts she already set. We spent the next hour reviewing the folder in detail. Peter took notes, made copies, and explained each step like he was drawing a map. By the time I left his office, I wasn't just holding a folder of secrets anymore. I was carrying armor. Driving home, the sky stretched wide and clear. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I didn't feel like a man drifting. I felt anchored, grounded, armed with certainty. Back at the house, I set the folder on my desk and locked the drawer again. Then I poured a glass of water, stood at the window, and looked out at the garden. Helen had known. She had planned. And now Peter had confirmed it. The house was mine. The villa was waiting. Emily was protected. And Mark and Laura? They had no idea just how far ahead their mother had been playing the game. The following week, Peter called me back to his office. His voice on the phone was calm, but clipped the way it always got when he'd already made up his mind. Richard, I've put some documents together. You need to see them. So I drove back across town, the blue folder riding shotgun beside me like an old friend. When I stepped into Peter's office, he already had a neat stack of papers waiting on his desk, each clipped with yellow tabs. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. We're going to make this official. I lowered myself into the chair, feeling the leather creak beneath me. Peter slid the first document across. This is a letter addressed to your children. It makes one thing crystal clear: you own your house outright, and no transfer sale or mortgage can occur without your explicit consent. This isn't just for them, it's a marker. If they attempt anything shady, this letter becomes Exhibit A. I read the letter. It was written in Peter's sharp legal prose, each sentence cutting like glass. My name, my property, my rights. No ambiguity, no wiggle room. Helen would have approved. Next, he slid over another sheet. This is a cease and desist template. If they pressure you further, we'll send it. It warns them that attempts to interfere with your financial decisions will be treated as harassment. Again, paper trails matter. I nodded slowly, my fingers resting on the thick paper. They won't like that. They don't have to, Peter said flatly. They just have to understand it. The third stack was heavier, stapled thick. These, he said, are preliminary filings in case they attempt to pursue conservatorship. The word landed like a blow. Conservatorship. Yes. Peter leaned forward. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. Children argue their parent isn't competent to handle their own affairs. If the court agrees, they gain control of your assets. But with these documents, medical records, notarized statements, my own certification, we make it very hard for anyone to even start down that path. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. So even if they try, they won't get far, Peter finished. I pressed my palms against my knees, grounding myself. Helen's voice echoed in my head. Never rush. Never explain. Decide, don't ask. She had known this could happen. She had built the plan and Peter was fortifying it. He tapped the last folder. Now about the villa. The Lisbon firm is legitimate. I've checked them. I'll send them a notarized copy of Helen's death certificate, along with a letter asserting your claim as surviving spouse. That begins the transfer process. Until it's finalized, don't mention Portugal to anyone. Not Mark, not Laura. This is for you alone. I nodded. Understood. Peter leaned back, folding his hands. His eyes softened for a moment. Richard, I've seen a lot of cases like this. Families tearing at each other, children circling parents like vultures. It's ugly. But I've rarely seen anyone as prepared as Helen made you. She gave you a gift most people never get the chance to fight back with proof. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. She always saw things I didn't. Peter smiled faintly. Then let's honor that by not wasting what she left. We spent the next 2 hours signing, initialing, stamping. Each pen stroke felt like a line drawn in the sand, a barrier raised between me and the storm I knew was coming. When I left his office, I carried not just Helen's folder, but Peter's reinforcements, a fortress of paper and ink. At home, I laid everything out on my desk. Helen's notes, Peter's letters, the photographs of the villa. The brass key lay in the center, gleaming in the lamplight. I poured myself a whiskey and sat back in my chair. The silence of the house no longer felt fragile. It felt fortified. I thought about Mark and Laura. They would come again, probably soon. They would bring new words, new tactics, maybe even a lawyer of their own. But this time I wouldn't just be an old man defending his grief. I would be armed with Helen's foresight and Peter's law. I lifted my glass toward the photograph of Helen and Emily in the garden. You built the plan, I whispered. I'll carry it out. The whiskey burned on its way down, steadying me. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I didn't just feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was preparing for battle. The next morning I woke with purpose. It wasn't grief that pulled me out of bed this time, it was strategy. Helen had left the blueprint, Peter had fortified it, and now it was my turn to put the pieces into action. I started with something simple. I drove to the post office and rented a P.O. box. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and chipped nail polish, handed me the key without a second thought. Box 143, she said. You can pick up any time during business hours. It was a small thing, but when I slid the brass key onto my keyring beside Helen's Portugal key, I felt a quiet satisfaction. One key for the life she'd built across the ocean. One key for the life I was securing here. From now on, anything important letters from Peter Bank, notices, documents wouldn't be slipping through the slot in my front door where anyone could see. They'd be locked behind another door, one only I could open. Next, I drove to the bank. I asked to speak with the manager, a man in his 50s, with a crisp tie and a polite smile. I want to freeze certain accounts temporarily, I said. No changes, no withdrawals without me present. He hesitated at first, offering me forms and explanations, but I stayed firm. By the time I walked out, my accounts were locked down tighter than a vault. No one, not Mark, not Laura, would be able to slide in through some loophole. From the bank, I went to the county records office. I requested certified copies of the deed to the house, along with documentation showing the mortgage was satisfied years ago. The clerk looked at me curiously, but handed over the stamped copies without question. I slipped them into the leather briefcase with the blue folder, proof in black and white. By lunchtime, I was back at the house. I spread everything across the kitchen table, the P.O. box key, the bank confirmation slips, the certified deeds. One by one, I slid them into the folder, layering new defenses atop Helen's originals. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I stopped at an electronics store and bought a small digital recorder. Nothing fancy, just a device that could slip into a pocket and catch words before they could vanish into denial. From now on, every conversation with Mark or Laura would be preserved. If they threatened, if they pressured, if they tried to twist my words, I would have evidence. Back home, I tested it. I pressed the red button, spoke into the microphone, and played it back. My voice crackled through the tiny speaker, tired but steady. This is Richard Hale. I am not incompetent. I make my own decisions. Hearing my own words played back was strangely powerful. It was like proof that I still existed in full, that I hadn't been diminished by grief the way they wanted to believe. I carried the recorder in my pocket the rest of the day, its weight small but significant. Later, as dusk settled over the garden, I walked the path Helen and I had laid stone by stone. The rosemary brushed against my arm, fragrant and grounding. The lemon tree swayed gently, its branches alive with promise. I paused beneath it, running my hand along the bark. Helen had once said, "Trees don't hurry. They just grow. And that's enough." She had been right. Growth wasn't loud or flashy, it was steady. And I was growing into something new now, not just a widower fumbling through grief, but a man protecting what was his. Inside, I sat at Helen's desk and wrote another list. At the top, protect, preserve, prepare. Under it, I added, P.O. box secured, bank accounts frozen, deeds certified, recorder purchased. Then in smaller letters, I wrote next Lisbon call with Peter present. I closed the notebook, slid it into the folder, and locked the desk drawer. The phone buzzed on the counter, another message from Mark. "We should talk. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I didn't answer. Instead, I pressed the recorder in my pocket, hearing the faint click as it began to capture the silence around me. Proof, I thought. Even silence has weight if you save it. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window watching the last light fade from the garden. For weeks I had been drifting, waiting for life to happen to me. But now every step I took felt deliberate, anchored. Helen had left me tools. Peter had given me armor, and I was learning how to wield them. For the first time since her funeral, I wasn't just surviving grief. I was preparing for whatever came next. The next morning, I didn't rush into errands or phone calls. I let the house wake with me. The floorboards creaked under my bare feet, the kettle whistled, the refrigerator hummed its steady song. For weeks, those sounds had been cruel reminders of emptiness noise without Helen. But now, in some small way, they felt like rhythm. A heartbeat. Proof that life kept moving whether I stumbled with it or not. I poured coffee into my chipped green mug, the one Emily had accidentally cracked years ago. I traced the line in the ceramic with my thumb, remembering the way Helen had laughed when I said we should keep it. Character, she'd called it. Everything worth keeping has a mark somewhere. That word keeping clung to me as I moved through the house. Keeping the house. Keeping Helen's plan. Keeping Emily's trust. I wandered into the living room, sunlight slanting across the rug. Dust floated in the beams, tiny flecks of light drifting like sparks. Helen used to call this the dance of the house. She'd sit on the couch with a book in her lap, point to the air and whisper, "Look, Rich, the house is alive today." I stopped at the hallway where the pencil marks still etched the wall, Mark at 8, Laura at 12. I touched the faint grooves and remembered the way Helen's eyes had softened when she measured them. Pride, yes, but also something more complicated. Even then, she must have seen what I couldn't, their hunger for more than what they'd earned. In the dining room, Helen's favorite chair still sat angled, just so as if she'd slipped away only for a moment. I ran my hand across the worn armrest. How many conversations had we shared here? How many times had she tried to warn me gently, her words, like water over stone wearing at my stubbornness? One memory rose clear. A winter evening, maybe 3 years ago. The kids had just left after Thanksgiving dinner, and I was rinsing dishes while Helen dried. She had paused, towel in hand, and said, You see the way they look at this house, don't you? Like it's already theirs. I'd laughed it off, told her she was being dramatic. She had just shaken her head, her eyes fixed on me. You don't want to see it, but I do. They're already measuring the walls. I hadn't answered. I didn't want to believe it then. But now her words felt carved into the wood itself. I walked out into the garden, mug warm in my hand. The rosemary brushed against my leg as I passed, releasing its sharp, clean scent. Helen had planted it herself, kneeling in the dirt, with her sun hat tilted back, hands dirty and determined. She'd smiled up at me that day and said, "Plants don't lie, Richard. They just grow toward the light." I stood beneath the lemon tree, its branches heavy with green fruit, not yet ripened. My fingers traced the bark. Helen had loved this tree most of all. "It's stubborn," she'd said once. "It won't give up just because the season's harsh. It waits, and when it's ready it blooms again." I closed my eyes, breathing deep. That was grief too, wasn't it? Waiting. Enduring. Blooming again when you least expected it. I turned back to the house, the familiar shape rising against the morning sky. For weeks I had seen it as a burden, too big, too quiet, too heavy without her. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a fortress. Helen had made sure of that. Paid off. Protected. Mine. I went back inside, pulled the blue folder from the desk and laid it open across the table. The documents stared back at me, deeds, policies, letters, proof of ownership, proof of foresight, proof of Helen's love. I added my own notes beside hers. Where she had written, "Never rush," "Never explain," I added, "Never doubt again." Where she had written, "Teach Emily how to keep what matters," I underlined it twice. The phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't need to look to know it was Mark or Laura. Their persistence had become predictable, a drumbeat of entitlement. But the noise no longer rattled me. I had my footing now. I pressed the recorder in my pocket, letting it click on. Even silence was worth recording. Proof that I was here, steady, unbroken. I stood at the window again, watching the garden sway in the wind. Helen had left me 2 lives, one rooted here, one waiting across the sea. And in both, she had left me the same instruction. Decide. Don't ask. For the first time since she was gone, I felt not only her absence but her presence, in the rosemary's scent, in the lemon tree's stubborn reach, in the marks on the wall and the letters in the folder. Grief still pressed heavy, yes, but beneath it something steadier was growing. Control. The knock came on Saturday morning, sharp and deliberate. I knew it wasn't Emily, she never knocked like that. It was the sound of formality, of someone arriving with an agenda. I opened the door to find Mark and Laura standing there, both dressed like they'd walked straight out of a boardroom. And behind them stood a man I didn't know. Gray suit, leather briefcase, the practiced, neutral expression of an attorney. Dad Mark set his jaw set. "We thought it best to bring someone who can help us all be clear." I raised my eyes to the stranger. He extended a hand. "Mr. Hale, I'm David Clark, counsel for your children." I didn't take the hand. "I already have counsel," I said, stepping aside. And there, as if timed to perfection, Peter Alvarez emerged from the hallway. He had insisted on coming early, sitting quietly in the living room with a folder balanced on his lap. When Mark and Laura walked in, the surprise flickered across their faces like a crack of lightning. Peter, Laura said tightly, "We didn't realize you should have Peter cut in." His voice was calm, but edged the tone of a man who'd spent decades reminding people of boundaries. "Richard asked me to be here. Let's sit." We gathered around the dining table. Emily wasn't with them this time. I noticed that immediately. They hadn't wanted her to see this. Clark opened his briefcase, slid out a stack of papers. "We're here out of concern," he began smoothly. "Your children believe the upkeep of this home is more than you should handle alone. They've identified a buyer, a reputable party, and they'd like to proceed with your consent. Peter leaned forward, his hands folded. There will be no sale, he said flatly. This house is Richard's free and clear. The mortgage was paid off years ago. No encumbrances, no debts. Any attempt to sell without his consent is unlawful. Mark's jaw tightened. We're not trying to be unlawful. We're trying to be practical. There's that word again, I said quietly. Practical. As if practicality was reason enough to bulldoze a man's life. Laura shifted in her chair, her voice pitched higher. Dad, please. We're not the enemy here. We just want you safe. This house is too much for one person. Peter's eyes flicked toward me, giving me the floor. I set my coffee cup down carefully, the porcelain ringing faintly against the wood. Your mother left this house to me, I said. She paid it off so I wouldn't have to answer to anyone about it. Not banks, not buyers, not even you. Silence fell. Clark cleared his throat, trying to recover the rhythm. Mr. Hale, no one is disputing your love for the home. But emotions can't override reality. You're nearly 70. Houses require maintenance, money, energy. And I have all three, I said evenly. Peter opened his folder and slid out a document. For the record, this is a notarized certification of Richard's competency signed last week by his physician. Should anyone attempt to challenge his capacity to manage his own affairs, this document will stand in court. Laura's eyes widened. Mark's face flushed. Clark adjusted his glasses, suddenly less confident. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. I know what this is. You came here expecting a grieving man, someone you could steer toward the answer you wanted. But I'm not drifting anymore. I know exactly what I'm doing. Mark slammed a hand on the table. We're your children. We're supposed to help you. Peter's voice cut through the tension like steel. Help, yes. Control, no. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then we'll let the law remind you. Laura's eyes shimmered, torn between anger and something softer. Dad, we're scared for you. Don't you see that I met her gaze steady? What I see is two children who love the version of me that says yes. But the man sitting here today is the man your mother trusted to say no. The words landed heavy. Mark pushed back from the table, pacing the room. Laura dropped her eyes to her lap. Clark shuffled his papers, clearly unprepared for resistance. Finally, Peter closed his folder with a snap. This meeting is over. My client isn't selling his home. He isn't incompetent. And he won't be harassed into compliance. You'll receive a letter in writing to that effect. If you push further, you'll receive a cease and desist. And if you still persist, we'll see you in court. The room went still. Mark finally muttered, This isn't over. No, I said quietly. It isn't, but neither am I. They left without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the house, but it didn't rattle me. Not anymore. Peter turned to me, his eyes steady. You did well, he said. I let out a long breath, my hands trembling only now that it was over. I just said what Helen would have wanted me to say. Peter placed a hand on my shoulder. Then you said exactly the right thing. The house was still echoing with the slam of the door when I sat back down at the dining table. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I felt clearer than I had in weeks. Peter had left soon after leaving me with the steady promise that he'd put everything in writing. I believed him, but I also knew something deeper. It wasn't just Peter's voice that mattered. It was mine. For too long I'd let silence speak for me. Silence at Thanksgiving when Mark hinted at refinancing the house. Silence on the porch when Laura asked whether I'd considered something smaller. Silence when Helen tried to warn me. But silence had cost me enough. That evening I called them back, not to argue, not to explain, but to declare. We met the next day in the living room. Mark stood near the mantel, arms crossed, jaw tight. Laura sat on the couch, hands clasped like she was bracing for impact. Emily was upstairs in her old room's sketchbook open, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing below. I stood before them, not as the grieving widower they expected, but as their father, the man Helen had trusted to carry her plan. I'm going to say this once I began. My voice was steady, the kind of steady that doesn't ask permission. There are 3 rules from this point forward. You can choose to accept them, or you can choose distance, but they are not up for debate. Mark snorted, shifting his weight. Rules, Dad, I raised a hand. Listen first. Then you can decide how to respond. The room stilled. Rule 1, I said. This house stays mine. It was paid off years ago, and it will not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred. Your mother made sure of that. This home is not a bargaining chip. It's not a nest egg. It's where we built our life, and it stays in my hands until I'm gone. Period. Laura looked down at her hands. Mark muttered something under his breath, but I continued. Rule 2. If I ever move, it will be because I decide to, not because I'm pushed. Not because you found a buyer, or because you've decided what's practical. I move when I choose where I choose, and for reasons that are mine alone. The air in the room thickened. Laura's lips pressed tight like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Rule 3, I said, my voice softening. I will support Emily directly. Not through you, not filtered through your accounts. Your mother set something aside for her, and I'll make sure she gets it. That's between her and me. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that pressed into your skin. Mark finally exploded. So that's it? You'll just cut us out? You'll cling to this house until you die and we're supposed to sit back and nod? I met his glare without flinching. Yes. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Laura's eyes shimmered. Dad, it feels like you don't trust us. I sighed, the weight of years pressing in. I trust you to be who you've shown me you are. And that's why these rules exist, because love isn't the same as blind surrender. Mark shook his head, pacing now. This isn't love, Dad. This is stubbornness. No, I said, my voice low but sharp. This is clarity. For the first time in a long time, I see things as they are. And I won't apologize for it. Laura's voice cracked. We're just trying to look out for you. I softened, but only slightly. Then look out for me by respecting the boundaries I've set. That's what real care looks like. The room went quiet again. Mark stopped pacing, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Laura wiped at her eyes, silent. I thought of Helen, then her words on the porch. They love the version of you that says yes. I had been that version for too long. But this was the man she had trusted to say no. I stood taller, feeling the weight of the brass key in my pocket, the reminder of the other life she'd built for me. I didn't need to mention Portugal, not yet. That was my ace, not theirs. These rules are final, I said. If you can live with them, then we still have a family. If you can't, then you'll have to decide what distance looks like. But the days of circling and pressing and scheming are over. That ends now. Mark muttered again, but he didn't argue further. Laura just nodded, faintly, tears slipping down her cheek. I let the silence linger a moment longer before I turned and walked toward the window. The garden stretched beyond the glass, the rosemary swaying in the wind, the lemon tree stubborn and tall. For the first time since Helen's funeral, I felt not only anchored, but resolute. I had drawn the line, and for once they would have to decide which side of it to stand on. The silence in the room stretched like a taut wire humming with tension. Mark paced near the mantel, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw grinding like he was chewing gravel. Laura sat on the couch, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting anywhere but at me. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Laura broke the quiet with a sound that startled me, a choked sob, sharp and unguarded. She pressed her hands to her face, her voice muffled. I can't do this. I can't be the bad guy. Mark spun toward her, his voice sharp. "Don't start, Laura. He's playing us." I raised an eyebrow. "Playing you, Mark. I'm your father, not a chess opponent. The only one moving pieces is you." Laura's tears slipped between her fingers. "I didn't come here to fight. She looked up at me, eyes wet, voice trembling. "I just wanted to know you'd be okay. That you wouldn't be all alone." For the first time, I saw something real flicker through her. Not calculation, not performance, just fear. Fear of losing me, maybe. Or fear of facing her own guilt. I softened, but only slightly. "Laura, I will be okay. Because your mother made sure of it, and because I'm stronger than you think." Her lip quivered. "You don't sound strong, you sound angry. I don't want to remember you like this." Mark cut in, his voice rising. "Don't let him guilt you. He's twisting everything. Mom's gone, and now he's digging in out of spite." I turned to him, slowly, letting my voice drop. "Do you really believe that your mother, the woman who raised you, who carried this house on her back, would want me to hand it over like a pawn in one of your spreadsheets?" His jaw clenched, his silence answer enough. Laura wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice steadier now but still thin. "Dad, I don't care about money. I never did. I don't want to lose you too." Her words pierced deeper than Mark's anger ever could. For a moment, I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. Her hair tangled her small body, trembling until I whispered that everything would be all right. I exhaled slowly. "You're not losing me. You're just learning you can't control me." Laura's tears slowed, but she didn't argue. Mark, though, he couldn't let it go. He slammed his palm against the mantel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This is insane. You're choosing a house over your own children." "No," I said firmly, locking eyes with him. "I'm choosing my dignity, I'm choosing your mother's wishes, and I'm choosing to protect Emily's future. If that feels like losing to you, then maybe you need to ask yourself why." The words hit him hard. His face flushed crimson, his fists clenching. For a moment I thought he might actually shout, maybe even strike something again. But he stopped himself, turning away with a growl of frustration. Laura finally spoke, her voice, quiet but clear. "Mark, maybe we need to stop." He spun toward her. "Stop! She cut him off. "He's not bending." "And Mom." She hesitated, her voice breaking again. "Mom probably wanted it this way." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Mark stared at her, stunned. Then he looked at me, his expression unreadable. His mouth opened, then shut again. Finally, he stormed toward the door. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low and tight. The door slammed behind him, leaving Laura sitting in silence. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Dad, I don't know how we got here." I sat down across from her, my voice gentler now. "We got here because sometimes love gets tangled with wanting, and your mother knew that better than either of us." Laura shook her head, tears slipping again. "I don't want to be the villain." "Then don't," I said softly. "You don't have to agree with me, but you do have to respect me. That's the line. You cross it and yes, you'll feel like the villain. But if you stay on your side, if you accept the rules, then you'll still have me. That's your choice." She nodded slowly, her fingers twisting in her lap. "I'll try." I leaned back, exhausted but resolute. Trying is enough. For now. The house settled around us, the creak of old beams reminding me of Helen's words. "They love the version of you that says yes." But this time I hadn't said yes. And though it hurt to see Laura's tears and Mark's fury, I knew I'd done what Helen trusted me to do. I had held the line. The house was quiet again after they left, but not the soft quiet of peace, the taut quiet of anticipation. I walked through the rooms, slowly running my hands along door frames, window sills, the backs of chairs. Each surface carried Helen's touch somehow. She had chosen the curtains, the colors, even the way the couch faced the garden. For a moment, grief pressed in again, sharp and raw. But beneath it pulsed something new: resolve. Helen had left me choices. Not just the choice to stand my ground here, but the choice to walk away if I ever needed to. And if I was honest, part of me needed to be ready for both. That night after dinner, I opened my desk and pulled out my passport. The navy blue cover was worn at the edges. I flipped it open, studying the faded photograph inside me, 10 years younger, hair, darker eyes, less tired. The expiration date glared back, 6 months left. Not much time, but enough to make a move if I had to. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse downtown and applied for a renewal. The clerk stamped forms, clicked through her computer, and handed me the receipt. 6 to 8 weeks, she said, but sometimes faster. I thanked her, tucking the paper carefully into my wallet. It wasn't just a renewal, it was a lifeline. From there, I stopped at the travel agency Helen and I had used years ago. It surprised me they were still in business, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The agent, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, smiled politely as I asked about flights to Lisbon. Business or pleasure? She asked. Neither, I said softly. Preparation. She raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. I booked a refundable ticket for 2 months out. Just one. I wasn't ready to commit to the journey, but I wanted the option. Back at the house, I slipped the confirmation papers into the blue folder behind Helen's instructions. The folder was growing heavier with each step I took. Documents, receipts, proof that I wasn't drifting anymore. Next, I made duplicates of my most important keys. The house, the safe, the P.O. box. I placed one set in a small tin box and tucked it high on a shelf in the garage, hidden behind jars of nails and bolts Helen had organized decades ago. If anything happened, if someone forced me out, I'd still have a way back in. That evening, I called Peter. I renewed my passport, I told him, and I booked a refundable flight. He didn't sound surprised. Helen wanted you to be ready. That's all you're doing, being ready. Do you think it's paranoid? I asked. There was a pause. No. I think it's smart, especially with Mark's temper. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Later, I dialed Anna again. Her voice came through warm, though still heavy with grief, when she spoke Helen's name. I may need to come, I told her quietly. Not now, but soon. You will be welcome, she said. The villa is ready, always ready. I have kept it as if she were coming tomorrow. The words caught me off guard. You've been maintaining it all this time? Yes, Anna said simply. Because Helen asked me, and because she was my friend. I closed my eyes, picturing it: whitewashed walls, terracotta tiles, a garden facing the sea. A place Helen had dreamed into existence. A place that was waiting, tended by a stranger who felt more like an ally than my own children. After I hung up, I sat in Helen's chair in the study. The brass key lay on the desk, gleaming under the lamp. I pressed it into my palm, feeling the grooves dig into my skin. Across the ocean, that key unlocked a door she had bought for me. I wasn't leaving yet, but I was ready if I had to. I locked the blue folder back in my desk, slid the recorder into my pocket, and stood at the window. The garden stretched before me, swaying in the evening breeze. Mark and Laura thought they were the ones moving pieces on the board. But Helen had given me my own moves, quiet, steady waiting. And now I was making them, one step at a time. The idea came to me while I was sitting in the hallway, staring at the pencil marks on the wall, where we had measured their heights. Mark's crooked 8-year-old scrawl, Laura's neater 12. Those lines had once meant growth, hope, future. Now they felt like reminders of how far they'd drifted from what mattered. Helen's words echoed in my head. Teach her how to keep what matters. I realized then what I needed to do. Mark and Laura had spent months circling the house as though it already belonged to them. They treated it like an inheritance waiting on the clock. If they wanted ownership so badly, then fine, they could take ownership of what was already theirs. Not this house, not these walls. But their past, the boxes of trophies, old clothes, forgotten books that still filled the attic and closets. So I called a moving company. The man on the phone sounded confused when I explained. You want us to pack up? What exactly? Everything that belongs to my son and daughter, I said. Their childhood things, stored here for decades. I want it boxed and shipped to them directly. 2 days later, a truck pulled into the driveway. The movers climbed the stairs into the attic, the floorboards creaking under their boots. Dust filled the air as they pulled down boxes labeled in Helen's handwriting Mark School, Laura Keepsakes. I stood at the bottom of the ladder watching the procession. Each box carried weight, not just in pounds, but in history. Baseball gloves, yearbooks, old instruments abandoned when practice grew dull. A wedding dress Laura had worn once, folded carefully, but never reclaimed. One mover asked me if I wanted to sort anything. I shook my head. No, it's theirs. All of it. By evening, the truck was loaded. I handed the foreman 2 addresses, Mark's suburban home, Laura's townhouse, and instructed him to split the load. Deliver directly, I said. No storage, no delay. When the truck pulled away, the house felt lighter. The attic no longer sagged with forgotten relics. The closets breathed again. For the first time in years, the home felt like it belonged fully to Helen and me, not cluttered with the remnants of children who had grown but never fully let go. That night, I sat in the study with the blue folder open. I added a note to my own legal pad, returned what is theirs, keeping what is mine. The words steadied me. The next day, the phone rang. Mark's number flashed on the screen. I pressed record on the small device in my pocket before answering. What the hell did you do? His voice was sharp, incredulous. I sent you your things, I said calmly. My garage is full of boxes, old junk. You should have asked first. They were never mine to keep, I replied. They've been sitting here for decades waiting. Now they're where they belong with you. He swore under his breath. You're just trying to make a point. Yes, I said evenly. That this house is mine, your boxes are yours, and from now on we don't confuse the two. He hung up, furious. But I didn't shake. Later, Laura called. Her tone was different, confused more than angry. Dad, I got the boxes. My old piano books, my clothes. Why would you send all this now because it's yours? I said gently. And I need you to understand the difference between what's yours and what's mine. There was a pause. Then, softly, Is this about Mom? It's about respect, I said. She wanted me to keep what matters. And that means drawing a line. Laura didn't argue. She just sighed, heavy and tired. Okay, I'll find a place for them. When I ended the call, I sat quietly in Helen's chair. My hands trembled slightly, but not from doubt, from release. I had returned the past to them. I had cleared the house of everything that wasn't mine. And in doing so, I had fortified the truth this home belonged to me, and to Helen's memory, not to the ghosts of childhood or the greed of adulthood. In the quiet, I reached for the brass key again, rolling it between my fingers. Across the ocean, a door waited, but here too I had begun to reclaim space. Helen had written, "Never rush, never explain. Decide, don't ask." And today I had decided. It didn't take long for Mark to show up. The boxes had barely been in his garage for 2 days before his truck roared up my driveway, gravel spitting under the tires. I watched from the front window as he climbed out, his face flushed, his jaw set tight. He didn't bother knocking. He shoved the door open like he still had the right. "Dad," he barked, storming into the hallway. What the hell was that? I stayed calm, leaning against the doorframe to the study. "I returned your things." "You dumped decades of junk on me," he snapped. "Boxes I don't have room for things I don't want. You should have asked before doing something like that. They were never mine to keep," I said evenly. "They belonged to you, and now they're yours again." He threw his hands up, pacing like a caged animal. "You're just making some symbolic point. Punishing us because we care enough to want what's best for you." I shook my head. "No, Mark. I'm reminding you that this house isn't a storage unit, and it's not waiting to be carved up for profit. It's my home. Those boxes were yours. Now they're back where they belong." His eyes narrowed. "You think this is some kind of lesson that you can shame us into backing off?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It's not shame. It's clarity. What's mine is mine. What's yours is yours. I've drawn the line. He stopped pacing, turned to face me, fists clenched at his sides. "You're pushing us away." "No," I said softly. "You're pushing yourself away. I'm not shutting the door on family. I'm shutting the door on greed." His face reddened further, and for a moment I thought he might strike the wall the way he used to when he was a teenager, when anger was the only language he knew. Instead, he jabbed a finger toward me. "You're going senile, Dad. That's what this is. First you start hiding things, making secret moves, now this sending boxes like some kind of declaration of war." I let his words wash over me, steady as stone. "I'm not senile, Mark. I'm more awake than I've been in years. And I've got proof if you'd like to see it. Peter has medical statements notarized. He's ready if you decide to test me in court." That stopped him. His mouth opened, then shut again, his bravado faltering. "I'm not the one who's confused," I said quietly. "You are. You've mistaken access for love. You've mistaken inheritance for entitlement, and I won't let you blur those lines anymore." His chest rose and fell, heavy with restrained fury. "So that's it. You're cutting us out. You're siding with Mom's paranoia over your own children." I felt the brass key in my pocket, its weight grounding me. "I'm siding with the truth. Your mother saw this coming. She prepared for it. And now I see it, too." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You always were easier to control when Mom was around. She softened you. Without her, you're just what I asked," my voice sharp, now the edge cutting through his. "A man standing on his own 2 feet, a husband honoring his wife's wishes, a father refusing to be bullied by his son." The words landed like stones. Mark flinched just barely, but I saw it. For a long moment the house was silent, except for the ticking of the hallway clock. Finally he muttered, "You'll regret this." "No," I said firmly. "What I'd regret is staying silent. I'd regret letting you turn my grief into leverage. I'd regret betraying your mother's trust." But this, I gestured around the house, the garden visible through the window, Helen's touch in every corner. "This is the one thing I won't regret holding the line." His shoulders tightened. Without another word, he turned and stormed out. The door slammed behind him, rattling the glass panes. I stood there a long while, the echoes fading into quiet. My hand went to the recorder in my pocket. I clicked it off, the small red light dimming. Proof again. His anger wasn't just in my memory, now it was preserved, ready if I needed it. I walked to the study and placed the recorder beside the blue folder. The house was lighter again, emptied of both boxes and bluster. Mark had left angry, but I had stayed steady, and that was the difference. A few days after Mark's stormy visit, I heard from Laura. Not through an angry knock on the door, not with lawyers at her side, just a quiet phone call in the late afternoon. "Dad," she said, her voice softer than usual, "I got the boxes." I was sitting in the garden when she called the rosemary, brushing my arm, the lemon tree casting dappled shade over the patio. I let the silence stretch a moment before answering. and there was a pause. They're heavy. Old things I hadn't seen in years. My piano books, a box of dresses, even my senior year yearbook. It felt strange opening them, like finding another version of myself I'd forgotten about. That's because they were always yours, I said evenly. They didn't belong to this house. They belonged to you. And it was time you had them back. I could hear her breathing on the other end, unsteady. Finally, she asked, "What lesson are you trying to teach me, Dad? What do you want me to learn from this?" Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It wasn't rehearsed or packaged neatly the way it usually was when she tried to persuade me. It was raw, and it deserved a raw answer. "I want you to understand the difference between keeping and taking," I said quietly. "I want you to know that love isn't measured by what you can gain, but by what you protect. Your mother saw that. She made it clear. And I'm trying to make it clear to you." She whispered into the phone almost like she was speaking to herself. "Keep what's yours. Don't confuse access with love." "Yes," I said. "Exactly. This house isn't yours, Laura. It isn't Mark's. It isn't anyone's but mine until I decide otherwise. But the things in those boxes, those are yours. That's the line." I could hear her sniff, her voice trembling. "I don't want to be like Mark. I don't want to circle you like a vulture. She broke off. I just didn't know how to do it differently. I closed my eyes, my throat tightening. "Then start here. Start by remembering what is truly yours. Start by respecting what isn't. That's how you do it differently." The line went quiet for a long time. I thought she might have hung up. But then she said softly, "I'll try. I don't know if I'll get it right, but I'll try." "That's all I ask," I said. When we ended the call, I sat in the garden a while longer, the late sun painting everything gold. The lemon tree swayed gently in the breeze, stubborn and strong. Helen had loved that tree. "It waits through every harsh season," she used to say. "But when it's ready, it blooms again." Later that evening, I went upstairs to the attic. For the first time in years, it was nearly empty. No more boxes stacked to the beams. Just a few suitcases and some holiday decorations Helen had insisted on keeping. The air felt lighter, easier to breathe. I stood in the space, my hand on one of the bare rafters. "We've cleared the past," I whispered. "Now we keep the present." Downstairs, I poured myself tea and sat at the kitchen table. Emily's sketch of the garden still rested by Helen's glasses. I studied it again, tracing the pencil strokes. She had captured not just the plants, but the light. She had seen the house the way Helen saw it, not as an asset, but as a living thing worth tending. That was the lesson Helen wanted passed on. And now, slowly, Laura was beginning to hear it. Mark wasn't ready. Maybe he never would be. But Laura had cracked just a little. Through tears, through boxes of dresses and piano books, she had glimpsed the truth. I thought of Helen's handwriting on the back of that photograph. "Teach her how to keep what matters." I smiled faintly. "I'm trying, Helen," I whispered into the quiet house. "I really am." And for the first time in weeks, I believed she could hear me. The decision hadn't been made, not yet. But every day that passed, I felt Helen's plan tugging at me, whispering across the pages of the blue folder, urging me not just to defend, but to prepare. So I began to ready the house, not to abandon it, but to secure it. One morning I drove to the hardware store and bought a small fireproof safe. Heavy, awkward, the kind you can't carry without both arms straining. Back home, I slid it into the back of the hall closet and bolted it to the floor. Into it I placed duplicates of the deeds, Peter's letters, the notarized competency certification, and the insurance policy naming Emily. I set the brass key inside for a moment, then pulled it back out, slipping it into my pocket. Some things needed to stay close. I also copied Helen's letter by hand, every line, every curve of her script. It took me hours, my old fingers cramping, but I wanted to feel her words flow through me, not just as evidence but as memory. When I finished, I sealed the copy in an envelope and placed it in the safe. The original stayed in the blue folder on my desk, where I could touch it when I needed her voice near. The house itself I fortified in small ways. I replaced locks, tightened windows, even added a security camera by the front door, something Helen would have teased me for. But I could almost hear her approving now. And still the thought of Portugal pressed in. At night I spread the photographs of the villa across my desk. The whitewashed walls, the tiled courtyard, the view of the Atlantic stretching endless and blue. I traced the outlines with my finger, imagining myself standing on that terrace. The air salted the sun, warmed the hum of waves in the distance. But more than that, I imagined what Helen must have imagined. She hadn't just bought property, she had bought possibility. A life where I wasn't cornered, where Mark's anger and Laura's guilt couldn't reach me. A life that was still mine to shape, not theirs. I thought about Emily. If I left, would she understand? Would she see it as desertion or as proof that boundaries mattered more than appeasement? I wasn't sure. But Helen had left her the insurance policy for a reason. She trusted Emily to carry the lesson forward, whether I taught it in person or from afar. One evening, as the sun sank and the garden glowed gold, I stood by the lemon tree with the brass key in my palm. I closed my eyes and whispered, "What do you want me to do, Helen? Stay and fight here or open this door you've left me?" The breeze stirred the branches, a soft rustle like a sigh. For a moment I could almost hear her laugh low, certain full of that quiet daring she carried to the very end. I went back inside and sat at the desk. I pulled the legal pad closer and wrote in block letters, "Stay or go." Under stay, I listed house secured, garden alive, memories intact, Emily nearby. Under go, I wrote, "Villa waiting, freedom across the sea." Helen's plan fulfilled. Silence from their circling. The lists were balanced heavy on both sides. No easy answer. But maybe that was the point. Helen hadn't given me orders. She had given me choices. She had trusted me to decide. I closed the pad, slid it into the folder, and locked the drawer. Then I walked through the house one last time before bed. Room by room, I touched the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Not as a man saying goodbye, but as a man acknowledging what he was protecting, what he might someday leave behind, but never abandon. In the quiet of my bedroom, I set the brass key on the nightstand beside the chipped green mug I used each morning. Two symbols side by side, one of past, one of future. And as I drifted to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt since Helen's last days. Not just grief, not just duty, but readiness. It was Helen's idea, really, though she wasn't here to say it out loud. She used to believe that if you put people at a table with food, their true selves would surface. A meal shows more than a meeting, she'd tell me. Watch how they eat, how they talk, what they ask for. You'll see what matters to them. So I decided to test it. I called Mark and Laura separately, invited them to dinner on Friday evening. I didn't mention Peter Portugal or paperwork. I kept my voice even casual. Just a family meal, I said. It's been too long. They both agreed, though, with tones that carried their own weight. Mark's clipped, Laura's cautious. When Friday came, I cooked the way Helen would have roast chicken with rosemary from the garden, lemon pie, with fruit from the tree, mashed potatoes whipped until smooth. The smells filled the house, rich and grounding. For a moment it felt like her again, her hands at my elbows, her laugh floating from the kitchen. I set the table carefully. Helen's china-polished silver linen napkins folded the way she liked. At the center I placed a small vase with fresh rosemary sprigs, their scent sharp and clean. Not flowers, Helen had always preferred herbs. They last longer and they feed you, she used to say. When Mark and Laura arrived, they looked surprised. Maybe they had expected a lecture. A locked study door, more papers spread across the table. Instead, they found dinner waiting. Emily came with Laura's sketchbook under her arm. She lit up at the sight of the pie. "Grandpa, did you make this with your grandmother's recipe?" I said, and she smiled wide, sliding into her seat. We ate in silence, at first the clink of silverware the only sound. Then Emily began chattering about school, her art projects, a teacher who encouraged her to submit her drawings to a contest. Her voice carried light into the room, cutting through the heaviness. I watched Mark and Laura carefully. Laura listened, nodding, asking Emily questions. Her eyes softened when her daughter showed a sketch from her pad, a quick drawing of the rosemary centerpiece. Mark, though, barely looked up from his plate. He ate quickly, mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. I knew that look. He was calculating. When Emily left the table to wash her hands, I leaned back and spoke. "So, how do you see this house now? As a home or as property?" The question landed heavy. Laura blinked, caught off guard. Mark set his fork down hard. "Dad," he said, his tone sharp, "are we really doing this again?" "Yes," I said calmly, "because this is the test. You've both been circling me, circling this house as though it were already yours. So I want to hear it plainly at my table." Laura looked down, her voice quiet. "It's always been home for me. Even when I moved out, it felt like the anchor." Her words carried hesitation, but they were true enough. Mark scoffed. "It's both. You can't ignore reality. A house is an asset. This one's valuable, sitting on land that's worth more every year. Pretending it's just sentimental is foolish." "There it is," I said softly. "The difference between you two. One sees an anchor, the other sees a ledger." Laura flinched. Mark leaned forward, his eyes flashing. "And what's wrong with that? You worked hard for this house. Don't you want that work to mean something for us?" "It already does," I said, my voice steady. "It means you grew up in a place of stability. It means your mother built something strong enough to carry us. It means you learned what love looks like in walls and gardens, even if you've forgotten." Mark shook his head, his jaw tight. "You're clinging to a fantasy." "No," I replied. "I'm holding on to a truth, and tonight proves it." Laura's eyes shimmered. "Dad, I know we've pushed too hard. I know we made mistakes. But I don't want to lose this house as a place to come back to. Not because of money, because it feels like her." For a moment, silence pressed heavy over the table. Mark stared at his sister like she'd betrayed him. But I saw Helen in her words, a flicker of recognition, of remembering what truly mattered. Emily returned, sliding into her chair with a smile, unaware of the storm swirling above her. She picked up her fork and began eating pie, humming softly. I looked at her, then at Laura, then at Mark. And I knew the truth of what Helen had left me to decide. The house wasn't theirs. It wasn't Emily's, not yet. It was mine to protect until the day came when someone worthy could keep it. I leaned forward, my voice calm but final. This house will remain as it is, until I choose otherwise, and I will decide who keeps it, not a buyer, not a ledger, not a lawyer. Me. Mark's jaw tightened, his knuckles white against the tablecloth. Laura nodded slowly, her eyes shining. Emily just smiled, licking pie from her fork. And in that moment, I felt Helen's presence strongest of all. She had been right. A meal showed more than a meeting. And tonight, I had seen exactly who they were. The Monday after that dinner, I sat across from Peter in his office again, the blue folder open between us. He adjusted his glasses, flipping through the papers with the same precision as before. "If you're ready," he said, "we'll make the call." The Lisbon law firm's number sat on the top page, underlined in Helen's handwriting. I had stared at it for weeks, my thumb tracing the digits, but I hadn't yet dared to dial. Helen's note beside it. Keep private until necessary felt like both permission and warning. Now, with Peter present, it felt necessary. I nodded. Let's do it. Peter dialed the line, crackling faintly with the international connection. A woman answered, her voice smooth, professional Portuguese lilt coloring her English. Almeida and Rocha, Lisbon. Peter spoke first, introducing himself as my legal counsel. He explained Helen's passing, my standing as surviving spouse, and our intent to confirm ownership of the villa in Algarve. The woman's voice softened when she heard Helen's name. "Ah, Mrs. Hale," she said. "We remember her. A very decisive woman. She arranged everything carefully." I felt my throat tighten. Of course, Helen had left her mark even there across an ocean. The woman explained the process clearly. I would need to send Helen's death certificate copies of my identification and a signed declaration. Once received, they could begin transferring the title into my name. "It is straightforward," she said. "Your wife made sure of that." After we ended the call, Peter leaned back, studying me. "It's in motion now. The villa will be yours soon enough." I sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down. For so long, Portugal had been an idea, a secret, a whispered possibility. Now it was becoming real. Back at the house, I carried the folder into Helen's study and spread the photographs of the villa across the desk again. Whitewashed walls, a tiled courtyard, vines creeping along sunlit stone, the Atlantic stretching endless beyond a terrace. I tried to imagine myself there, waking to sea air, walking through a garden, not unlike this one, the rosemary replaced with lavender, the lemon tree with orange. Helen must have pictured it countless times. And now I could see it too. That evening I called Anna. Her voice lit with warmth when she heard me. I spoke with the lawyers, I told her. The transfer has started. She exhaled the sound of relief carrying through the line. "Good. I have kept everything ready. The villa is clean. The garden is alive. It is waiting." I smiled faintly. "You've cared for it all this time?" "Yes," she said. "Because Helen asked me, and because it mattered. She told me once, 'One day Richard will need this. Keep it alive for him.' And so I did." Her words hit me deep. Helen had not just bought property, she had planted a future, and asked another soul to tend it until I was ready. When we hung up, I walked into the garden here at home. The rosemary brushed against my hand, the lemon tree swayed. The air was cool, scented with earth and leaves. I thought of Portugal, the villa's garden facing the sea. For the first time, I let myself picture leaving. Not running away, not abandoning, but stepping into the door Helen had built for me. Later that night, I packed a small suitcase. Just a trial run. A pair of shoes, a few shirts, my passport, the brass key. I set it by the bedroom door and stared at it for a long time. The weight of grief hadn't left me, but it had shifted. It no longer pinned me down, it pointed me forward. Helen had dared me to build a life beyond loss. She had written it into deeds, into policies, into instructions hidden in blue cardboard. And now I was ready to follow. Portugal wasn't just a backup plan anymore. It was waiting. And I was almost ready to walk through that door. The suitcase sat by the door for a week before I touched it again. Every morning I'd pass it on my way to the kitchen, the brass key tucked inside like a heartbeat. It wasn't impatience that kept me from picking it up, it was reverence. Helen hadn't built this path for rushing. She'd built it for readiness. One evening, as the sun fell low and painted the house in warm light, I sat at the dining table with the blue folder spread open. Around me, the home breathed with memory. Helen's chair angled toward the garden, Emily's sketch resting near her glasses, the smell of rosemary drifting through the open window. I traced Helen's handwriting once more. Never rush. Never explain. Decide, don't ask. And then the other teach her how to keep what matters. It struck me that those two sentences weren't separate instructions. They were one truth broken into two parts. To keep what matters, you must decide for yourself. You must stop asking permission from those who only see you as a ledger. I closed the folder and sat back, letting the silence fill me. For months, grief had weighed me down, hollowed me out. I'd thought survival meant just breathing through each day, but Helen had shown me that survival wasn't enough. Survival was standing guard. Survival was protecting. Survival was keeping what mattered until someone else could carry it forward. Mark might never understand. His eyes saw numbers where Helen saw roots. His hands measured profit where she measured growth. That was his choice, and I had stopped fighting to change it. Laura. She wavered. She cried. She doubted she softened. Maybe one day she'd truly understand. Maybe not. But the crack was there, the glimpse of truth beneath the greed. And Emily, dear Emily, she saw it already. In her drawings, in her laughter, in the way she sketched rosemary instead of ledgers, gardens instead of graphs. Helen had been right to choose her. She would learn, and I would teach her, just as promised. I stood and walked into the garden, the evening air cool on my skin. The lemon tree swayed gently, its fruit not yet ripe, but growing, waiting. I touched its bark, rough and steady, beneath my palm. This is what matters, I whispered. Not the profit, not the ledger, the roots, the growth, the waiting until it's ready. The stars came out one by one, glittering above the roofline. I thought of Portugal, of the villa waiting across the sea. I thought of the Atlantic stretching endless, of Anna tending the garden there, of Helen's laughter echoing between those whitewashed walls. And I realized something. It didn't matter whether I stayed or went. The house, the villa, they were both part of Helen's gift. What mattered wasn't the walls. It was the lesson. The lesson she had written in her hand, spoken in her garden, lived in every decision she'd made. Keep what matters. Protect it. Pass it on. I looked up at the stars, my chest tightening with both grief and gratitude. Helen, I whispered. I see it now. And I'll keep it. For Emily. For us. For me. Inside, I sat at the desk one final time and opened my notebook. On the last page I wrote, "Final lesson. Say no when no is truth. Guard what cannot be replaced. Teach the next generation how to hold, not how to take. Love is measured not by what you leave behind, but by what you protect until the end." I closed the book and set it gently on top of the folder. Then I reached for the recorder, pressed the red button, and spoke aloud, not just for myself, not just for Emily, but for anyone who might one day hear. My name is Richard Hale. I am not powerless. I am not a ledger. I am a man who keeps what matters. And if you hear this, let it be a reminder, no one has the right to decide your worth but you. Keep your roots. Keep your truth. And pass it on. The red light blinked softly as I ended the recording. The house was quiet. The garden swayed, and for the first time since Helen's funeral, I didn't feel like I was living in her shadow. I felt like I was carrying her forward. So here's the truth. I've learned the lesson I want to leave with you. Life will always circle you with demands, people who want pieces of you, who want what you've built, who think they know better how your story should end. But you don't owe them control. What you owe, what we all owe, is to keep what matters. To draw the line between love and entitlement. To stand firm even when it shakes the walls. To protect the roots planted in trust, in sacrifice, in love. That's what Helen taught me. That's what I'll teach Emily. And that's what I want to pass on to you. If you've ever felt pressured, cornered, treated like a ledger instead of a person, remember you have the right to decide. You have the strength to protect. And you have the duty to pass on only what truly matters. So tell me, what are you keeping? What lesson did someone you love leave you that you'll never let go? Share it in the comments below. And if Helen's story, my story, has touched you, hit subscribe, because there are always more truths to tell, more lessons to pass down. And remember, keeping what matters isn't just survival, it's love lived out loud.